The eyes of the whole world are now, of course, focused on the Middle East. We are witnessing Trump's diplomacy in real time. We see it with Thailand, we saw it with Thailand and Cambodia, with Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Syria, Bahrain. We have been watching Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Gambit. And now perhaps the biggest game is Iran, a glaring sore spot for the whole world for the last 47 years, it seems. Hostages. How many was it? 444 days in Tehran. Ship explosions, embassy attacks, the bloody killing of children and women in Israel, and after 38 days of non-stop bombings, suddenly a break. Why? Who benefits? What will it achieve? The U.S. absolutely does not want the regime in Iran to collapse, and for Iran to become Iraq 10 times over. When I say collapse, it doesn't mean we're not ready for regime change. Just collapsed and everything went to hell, with endless internal strife, wars, violence, and looting. But today we'll start with something else, with what has all of America deeply concerned today, about Obama, Comey, and Brennan's betrayal, and others. Others? This was not put on the back burner of the campaign. This wasn't put on the back burner because of the campaign. Justice in the U.S. is very slow. I've already talked about this. It's one thing to say it, but another to realize half a year has passed with nothing happening. And if it's real, truthful, lawful justice, it's incredibly complicated and slow, and that's done on purpose, to make it difficult. It's not a kangaroo court. They didn't just pass a sentence and go have a drink. A person came, said something, yeah, all right, he left. That's it. Execute. They went and shot him. So that nothing like that, or even close to that, happens, everything is made very complicated and slow. If it's political, fake, or thieving, then of course everything happens very, very quickly. But then in the end, either you need the judge to be completely on your side, or it just doesn't work out. And the main thing was to throw mud at the person. So John Solomon, whom I've told you about many times already, I think you already know who he is. The case about the conspiracy of Barack Obama and his closest aides to undermine the foundations of American democracy. In other words, the very thing that Trump is constantly being accused of.
All right, let's move on to the big news that just came out a couple of minutes ago on justthenews.com. We've been following the story of James Comey. He's being accused of lying to Congress because he claimed that he never allowed his staff to leak information to the media. And at the end of last week, as we told you, he played the victim card. I'm being maliciously persecuted because Donald Trump hates me. Well, today the FBI agents and the lead prosecutor on his case, Lindsay Halligan, responded. And how did they respond? With James Comey's own emails and handwritten notes. And what do they show? They show that James Comey clearly knew that his top aide was anonymously providing information to the news media. He not only knew about it, he wrote in a personal letter, "Good job, my friend," actually congratulating him when Dan Richman, one of his top lieutenants, told him what he had just done with the New York Times. A top lieutenant told him what he'd just done with the New York Times.
Comey leaked information to the media to smear his opponent, including Trump, and lied about Hillary and her crimes.
Yes, as stated in the indictment, these are stories about Hillary Clinton's emails. So, this confirms the government's position that Comey authorized leaks through his staff reporters regarding the Hillary Clinton case, just as they claimed. But they went a little further. It turned out that when Kash Patel discovered those very burn bags in that secret room where a huge amount of FBI evidence was stored, they found something truly special. Several handwritten notes by James Comey. What do these handwritten notes reveal? He apparently was aware in September 2016 of intercepted U.S. intelligence that Hillary Clinton had approved a plan to pin a fake Russian label on Donald Trump's campaign. This is important because the handwritten notes do not match James Comey's testimony. James Comey told Congress, "I'm not familiar with this. I don't think I ever knew about it." He wrote about it in his handwritten notes. And finally, the question arises, why would James Comey do this? What was the motive? Today's letters, just released in court documents, give us another answer. He wrote to Jaden Richmond, his lieutenant, that he fully expected to soon be working for President-elect Hillary Clinton. This is straight from the emails. So he was expecting to work for Hillary Clinton, and he thought that Hillary Clinton would be grateful for the way he handled her email case. Oh, that's not the victim card I think Comey was planning to play. But all these letters, court documents, and even handwritten notes, we just posted them on justanews.com. You can check them out today. Comey, FBI.
So,
He wrote one thing for himself.
but under oath, he said something completely different. And here's proof of the conspiracy. News alert, previous message from Fox News. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard today released a sensational report that demonstrates a conspiracy by the sitting President Barack Obama and his intelligence agencies to sabotage President-elect Donald Trump, brainwash the electorate, and undermine the legitimacy of the election.
There is irrefutable evidence showing how President Obama and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false. They knew this would promote the fabricated narrative that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help President Trump win, selling it to the American people as if it were true. It was not.
Gabbard obtained an intelligence report that had been classified and kept in a CIA safe for almost 10 years. Investigators spent more than 2,000 hours looking into how the Russian fabrication originated, interviewing 20 CIA and FBI employees. And it turned out that the Obama administration had fabricated intelligence to make it look like Putin and Trump had stolen the election. A month after Trump defeated Hillary, Barack Obama was dissatisfied with his intelligence reports and ordered the CIA director to prepare a new assessment of how Russia interfered in the electoral process. This was an extremely unusual move. John Brennan personally selected 5 CIA analysts to prepare the report, and they were isolated. None of them knew what the others were working on, and only one analyst was responsible for preparing this report. There was nothing ordinary about this, and it was a rushed job to publish before Trump's inauguration. Nothing was coordinated with other intelligence agencies. Essentially, it was fabricated to please Barack Obama. There were 4 key elements from that assessment that were repeated over and over again and formed the basis of the Russian hoax and Robert Mueller's witch hunt. First, that Vladimir Putin wanted Donald Trump to win. Second, Putin took actions to help Trump win. Third, the Russians had compromising material on Trump. This was the so-called Steele dossier. And fourth, that the Russians tried to collude with Trump's election campaign. None of these things were ever true. There was no credible intelligence to support these accusations. Senior CIA officials repeatedly refused to spread these accusations, but they were repeatedly forced by CIA Director Brennan and the directors at the White House, who insisted on pushing them even without verifiable evidence. The Obama administration manipulated intelligence, lied about sources, distorted quotes, failed to back up their statements, concealed information that contradicted their version, and even used anonymous online posts. Rank-and-file CIA employees admitted that their actions violated their own professional standards. A powerful pressure campaign was launched which came directly from the very top. CIA analysts claimed that they received highly unusual directives from political appointees, the CIA director, and personally from Obama himself. That's how this Russian fabrication was born.
Donald Trump knows that the Russians helped him win in 2016. Putin hated Secretary Clinton so much that he clearly preferred the one who was running against her.
It was Russia that tried to interfere in the election in a very systematic way and boost Donald Trump's chances of being elected. It was such a malicious disinformation campaign carried out against the American people that at one point, 60% of Democrats believed that the Russians had hacked our voting machines to help Trump win the White House. What this report actually shows is that the Russians simply wanted to create chaos and undermine Americans' democracy. Reliable intelligence indicated that Vladimir Putin didn't care at all who would actually win. He had no clear preferences, but like many others, he expected Hillary to win, and he had a small dossier of compromising materials on her, materials he never published. So if Putin really wanted Trump to win, why didn't he make that compromising material public?
There were emails from high-ranking DNC officials that provided evidence of, I quote, psycho-emotional problems, uncontrollable outbursts of anger, aggression, and cheerfulness. And that then Secretary of State Clinton, it was claimed, was taking strong tranquilizers every day. At the time, CIA Director Brennan and the intelligence community misinterpreted intelligence data and relied on questionable, low-quality sources to create a fabricated false narrative that Putin, so to speak, had a clear preference for Trump.
So if Clinton was on tranquilizers, as the Russians believed, why didn't they leak it so that Trump would win?
How true is...
What was filmed about Clinton?
All I know is what the Intelligence Committee reported as a result of their investigation. I think the main point implied here is that, based on intelligence, we understand what Russia claimed to have. And the important point here is that if they were trying to influence the election, as President Obama, James Clapper, and John Brennan all said, they did it to support Trump's election. They would have published the most compromising of that information.
Obama and his intelligence chiefs knew that Putin did not prefer Trump over Hillary, but they manipulated the intelligence to create the appearance of the opposite. Obama and his intelligence agencies knew that Putin was not colluding with Trump and didn't even order his people to help Trump win, but they spread this anyway. In a certain sense, Barack Obama did exactly what Putin wanted. He undermined Americans' trust in free and fair elections and provoked chaos in our country. The FBI were the ones who carried out what benefited our adversary.
Conspiracy is a serious crime, especially a conspiracy confirmed by the participants' own records. You really have to be such jerks. Add to that the fact that Hillary was saying everywhere that the election was stolen from her, that she actually won, but because of the Russians, she didn't get the presidency. She was actually the first to dispute the election results, not Trump. She did. There were others before her, but she refused to recognize the election results.
Do you believe that this new information implicates former President Obama in criminal behavior? We've handed over all these documents to the Department of Justice and will continue to do so. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is investigating the criminal aspects of this case. The evidence, that's right. The evidence that we found and made public directly indicates that President Obama directed the fabrication of this intelligence assessment. There is a lot of evidence and intelligence data that support this fact.
At the end of May, well, most likely at the end of May, all of this will go to court and there will be a huge international scandal. Well, and now to Iran, ladies and gentlemen, to the agreement on a temporary ceasefire, right? I don't even know what to call it exactly. A temporary respite. We don't want the collapse of the regime in Iran. So God forbid if the regime collapses.
Hello. The U.S. and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire just hours before President Trump's deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face the threat of destruction. Fox News confirms there is movement right now this morning in this strategically vital strait.
President Trump wrote on Truth Social stating, and I quote, "This is a great day for peace around the world. Iran wants this to happen. The United States will help clear the congestion in the Strait of Hormuz."
So, 2 hours before the announced massive bombings of Iran were set to begin, the Pakistani side, or rather the Pakistani mediators, they're not a side, of course, they don't represent anyone, they're in the middle, proposed a 2-week pause, a ceasefire. And Trump announced the following.
Acting in bad faith because he stated directly, "We will put an end to the 47-year regime," that's the IRGC, "and may God bless the people of Iran." So people can act in bad faith, but the president cannot. He threatened the regime. They got the message. They begged for a ceasefire.
Many of the 15 points are already agreed upon. Thank you for your attention. This is the U.S. position. Come here and we'll update you on Tehran's statements. The peace proposal consists of 10 points. The first 3 are important. Let's see how far they will go.
That is, the U.S. proposed a 15-point plan and Iran responded with its own 10 points. Here they are. But I want to say right away that Trump says that Iran published these points, but the American side threw all of this, so to speak, into the trash, and then Iran sent new, different, and distinct points. But let's go through them in order.
A guarantee of non-aggression from the United States is perhaps not viable from the start. Iran's control over the Hormuz Strait, which many consider to be international waters, acceptance of Iranian enrichment, but we already know that this is unacceptable for the United States. The next 2 points, 4 and 5, concern the easing of sanctions by the United States as well as the UN. Points 6 and 7 also concern some resolutions adopted by the United Nations regarding its nuclear program, including the IAEA. Keep in mind, ultimately, if you reach a peaceful settlement, who will be the inspectors going to Iran? Will this administration require that these inspectors represent, at least in part, the interests of this administration, meaning that they are American inspectors? Let's see if the Iranians will ultimately agree to that. Point number 8 is compensation for military damage. They already want reparations. Point number 9 is the withdrawal of all American troops from the region. And point number 10 is a ceasefire on all fronts. This includes Lebanon, which, as we already know, was not part of this, judging by the Israeli strikes on places like Beirut last night. Subtitles by Dima Torzak. So,
Basically, with this list of demands, Iran is saying that they have won the war, and now America and the world must surrender to the mercy of the victor. As you know, they did not win the war, and they know this very well. Then why? Let's listen to General Jack Keane.
Well, you need to look at this from Iran's perspective. Why did they block the Hormuz Strait? What goal were they trying to achieve here? Their only goal was to stop the war, and they achieved that goal. We really did stop the war. And not only that, Bill. The Iranians still keep everything under control. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy told all ships in the Gulf passing through the strait that they need their permission. So they have complete control over the Hormuz Strait, and all these ships will certainly comply with the warnings given by Iran. What is their next plan? I think they have two options in this situation. One of them, obviously, is that we enter into negotiations, and as you clearly pointed out, we couldn't be further apart in these negotiations. That's one of the main reasons why Iran has made its plan to enter negotiations public. I mean, they're stating it very boldly. This is exactly what we want to achieve. But they're just laying the groundwork for further prolonging the negotiations. They're real masters at confusing and dragging things out. Their goal in these negotiations will be to drag them out, to extend the ceasefire. Why? Well, we're getting close to a deal here. They'll say anything to convince our negotiators of that. We're getting close to a deal. And what will we do if we extend these negotiations? Iran is just buying time. Why? Because as time goes on and oil prices start to drop, the pressure on the president and the administration eases economically and financially, and to some extent politically as well. And they're counting on that pressure on the president at that very moment to deprive him of the will to strike again in a few weeks, precisely because of the extension of these negotiations. That's exactly what they're actually working toward. What we need to do right now is to immediately issue them an ultimatum with a 2-week deadline. Iran, you comply with our conditions, and we know what those conditions are, and the president wants to make them public again, to announce them. And if you don't meet our conditions in 2 weeks, then we will strike again. Their second plan, and they are implementing it now, is to attack our Arab allies in the region. They are still doing this. Why are they doing this? They are doing it because they want the Arabs to put pressure on the administration to stop Israel's attack in Lebanon. The Prime Minister and the President held extensive talks yesterday, and the Prime Minister certainly expressed his desire to continue his operation in Lebanon to completely clear the territory of all Hezbollah militants who had been constantly attacking the northern regions of Israel, as well as, to some extent, its central parts. Once and for all, they will demolish all the existing infrastructure. That is exactly what they are doing, and they have ground troops carrying it out. They will not tolerate it any longer. In other words, they intend to undertake something much more significant than what they did a few months ago. And they want to get permission for this while the Iranians want to stop it, and this is their second move here. And certainly I really hope that the administration will support the Prime Minister in this matter and allow them to completely drive Hezbollah out of this region. This is what I think we are facing in terms of what the Iranians are trying to do and how the United States should deal with what happened here.
The general has a military perspective, of course. The White House should have not only a military, but also a political perspective. In addition, the White House has, I hope, other means of pressure and persuasion that, let's say, the military does not have or does not use. Here's what the White House says.
As for the 2-week ceasefire announced by President Trump last night, this is a victory for the United States of America, achieved by the president and our incredible military. From the very beginning of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump stated that this would be a 4 to 6 week military operation to dismantle the military threat from the radical Islamic Iranian regime. Thanks to the incredible capabilities of American service members, the United States achieved and significantly exceeded these main military objectives in just 38 days. The U.S. armed forces destroyed Iran's defense industrial base, crushing the regime's ability to produce weapons that they and their proxies use to maim and kill Americans and terrorize the world. Iran's ability to build and stockpile ballistic missiles and long-range drones has also been set back by years compared to where it was 6 weeks ago, before the start of Operation Epic Fury.
Iran reported earlier this year that it planned to produce 10,000 missiles. At that time, they already had 2,000, and simultaneously from four sides, they published everything and talked about it. To attack Israel so that the Iron Dome wouldn't be able to intercept so many missiles and drones launched from different directions at the same time. Now they only have part of that stockpile left out of the 2,000. And as I understand it, they won't be able to produce them soon either. Their idea of charging money for passage through the Strait of Hormuz and using that to restore, let's say, military production is, of course, laughable. Besides, every day of bombing increases the need for reconstruction. More and more facilities are being destroyed. That is, the longer the war goes on, the more money and time they need for reconstruction.
We destroyed the vast majority of Iranian ballistic missiles, launchers, and long-range strike drones. As a result of more than 450 strikes on ballistic missiles and about 800 strikes on Iranian launchers and drone warehouses. In total, more than 13,000 targets were hit across Iran, and again this happened in just 38 days. Meanwhile, the Iranian Navy was completely destroyed. The United States destroyed a total of more than 150 warships, including 16 entire classes of Iranian military vessels. Although Iran was once the largest submarine force in the Middle East, now it doesn't have a single submarine. 97% of Iran's once vast arsenal of more than 5,000 naval mines have also been found and destroyed. Iran's air force is functionally and operationally completely irrelevant at this point. After the United States maintained complete air superiority over their country for several weeks. To emphasize the significance of this, before Operation Epic Fury, the Iranian Air Force was conducting between 30 and 100 sorties a day today. That number is 0. Iran's ability to finance and support its terrorist proxies has been significantly reduced. At this point, Iran can no longer distribute weapons to its proxies in the region. Iran will not be able to acquire nuclear weapons. Before the start of this successful operation, Iran was aggressively expanding its arsenal of short-range ballistic missiles. With this weapon and its fleet, Iran was trying to build up military power around its country. This would pose an imminent and existential threat to U.S. military assets in the Middle East, our allies in the region, and ultimately, the free world. Iran pursued this dangerous and aggressive strategy for one reason: to hold the entire world hostage to its terrorist ambitions. The Iranians sought to use their expanded military capabilities as a shield around their country, so they could continue to pursue their ultimate goal of developing nuclear bombs. But their murderous and sinister plans were blown up, both literally and figuratively, along with their army, their nuclear program, and most of their top leadership, including former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The control structures were also seriously disrupted after more than 2,000 strikes. Many of their remaining leaders are paralyzed by fear and can no longer move freely around their country or meet openly. Thanks to the unprecedented superiority of our warriors under the leadership of the Commander-in-Chief, the world has just witnessed a historically swift and successful military triumph.
I must say, 38 days is less than 1,465 days of war in Ukraine. I must say, 38 days is less than 1,465 days of war in Ukraine. It's less than 2,194 days in World War II and less than 7,130 days in the Vietnam War. This Iran campaign, gentlemen, 38 days.
The valiant efforts of all our incredible service members have created maximum leverage for the President of the United States, allowing him and his leadership team to conduct tough negotiations over the past few weeks. which has now paved the way for a diplomatic solution and long-term peace in the Middle East. The president's maximum pressure and the leverage created by the success of Operation Epic Fury led the Iranian regime to request and ultimately agree to a ceasefire proposal with the United States. Iran could no longer endure the bombings or risk what might follow after President Trump's ultimatum at 8 p.m. yesterday. Iran agreed to open the Hormuz Strait, and as the president stated, we received an offer from the Iranians that was recognized as a suitable basis for further negotiations. I've seen a lot of inaccurate information in the media today about these negotiations and the existing plans, so let me clarify and set the record straight. The Iranians initially proposed a 10-point plan that was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and was completely rejected. It was literally thrown in the trash by President Trump and his negotiating team.
The beginning of the end for Iran. I already told you why we, the U.S. and Israel, couldn't avoid starting the Iran campaign. Now I'll tell you why it will end the way it should, and not the way the globalists, Democrats, or Islamists dream of. Together, they are trying to build an Islamo-fascist global reorganization, calling it democratic socialism. They think that by changing the label, the name, they can fool us. Well, of course they will fool many, naturally, but thank God, not everyone. Let me start with Victor Davis Hanson, who describes the situation very clearly.
Victor Davis Hanson. Donald Trump recently laid out the endgame for Iran. How will this end? There are 3 scenarios. There were hints from Trump that he was going to bomb them back to the Stone Age in the style of Curtis LeMay. Or he could do as he did in Venezuela, find someone to talk to, someone who could take on the role of a transitional government. They would likely have to give in to the people's demands. In the end, you won't even have to talk to anyone. We won't bother, we won't argue, we'll just destroy your infrastructure and leave.
Here's a great summary of the possibilities. If it weren't for the elections in November, we could wait. But in a situation like 1926, we'll all do everything, and we'll do it as quickly as possible.
He said in the 5th week that it would take 2 or 3 weeks, so it might be 7 weeks in total or 2 months. This made people very angry, and they said, well, this is an endless war. And people on the left, remember, don't want the war to be successful because they want to win the midterm elections, and so far they haven't succeeded in hurting Trump. They think if they can frame this as a withdrawal like Afghanistan, which they orchestrated and was a disaster, they'll succeed. Or Vietnam, or Afghanistan, or Iraq, maybe they'll be able to overthrow him, and history is on their side since the opposition party gains seats and wins the midterm elections and then impeaches him. Their criticism isn't based on evidence, it's purely political and contagious. Recently, we had an F-15 shot down and damaged. One of the pilots was rescued. As of now, we still don't know what happened to the second one, but people went crazy. And after Trump's speech, some comments, reactions, Fareed Zakaria, and also Newsweek said, can you even imagine a war that cost so much and achieved so little, accomplished such insignificant results? I thought, are you serious? We lost 13, maybe 14, it's tragic, but 14 people attacking a country almost twice the size of Texas, 1.5 times the size of Alaska, with 93 million people. 5 weeks, that's hardly any time. I mean, we practically debuted, demilitarized it, and destroyed its ability to wage war. The only question is whether you should interfere with civilian infrastructure when you're trying to help the Iranians rise up and change the regime, because that's easy to do. You can deprive them of water, electricity, and as Trump said, send them back to the Stone Age. So all these restrictions they imposed on themselves, these people were saying, well, what about the Strait of Hormuz? Well, Donald Trump had a good argument. He said that the countries that use it and need it should come and patrol it. We can help them. We can deploy our Warthogs or Apaches or our tactical aviation and create a humanitarian corridor from the other side.
Хотите нефть, газ и удобрения?
It's very simple. Bring the ships and export, escort them, or pay tribute to Iran, just like it was in the Middle Ages, a fortress on the river, tribute to a baron or a local prince. If anyone thinks that Iran never even thought about controlling the passage of ships through Hormuz before America did, just read history. In 1980, Iran mined and shelled ships in the strait. In 1980 and 1972, they completely blocked it. By the way, for the last 30 years, they've been threatening every day to shoot at tankers, and in 2020, they actually did it. But right now, readers and even journalists are completely confused. Iran says they offered 10 points, which, in fact, Fox showed to all of us. I showed it to you. Trump says that these 10 points were personally thrown in the trash by him, and that instead, 2 hours before the deadline he set, another 10 points arrived, and that it is exactly these other 10 points that are the basis for negotiations. Since there are 10 points in both cases, it's often unclear what is actually being discussed. Well, let's try to figure it out. Several publications have reported that the second proposal includes this 2-week ceasefire and a suspension of U.S. and Israeli strikes in exchange for opening the Hormuz Strait, as well as stopping attacks on U.S. ships and bases. So what exactly is written there? As they say, we have no idea, because the White House is basically keeping silent about it. The complete and safe opening of the Hormuz Strait under some kind of joint or controlled passage regime, but without formally recognizing Iran's exclusive military control over the strait. This is, of course, different from the Iranian public version. Second, a non-aggression guarantee, meaning the U.S. stops the war against Iran and does not carry out preemptive strikes, provided that the agreements are observed. That is, if the agreements are observed, there is peace. If they are not observed, then, as they say, well, if you don't do it, then I won't do it either. Next. De-escalation of the conflict on all fronts. This means, first of all, stopping the strikes on Iran, and then gradually ending the war in Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and with Uzbekistan, the involvement of Iranian proxies, meaning, well, Hezbollah and so on. Now, the nuclear issue. Iran wants to keep the right to enrich uranium up to the levels agreed with the IAEA. Well, they understand that they'll find ways to cheat, yes, but they confirm their commitment not to seek nuclear weapons. And for the Iranians, say something just to keep the peace? Absolutely. That's it. Like, we'll allow a stricter inspection regime, but how will we know what the inspection is, what to inspect? Now, the missile and drone program, with limits on the range of the missiles and drones used by Iran and its regional allies. The details, by the way, are classified. Even those journalists who write about this saying that something has supposedly leaked, they don't know either. Now, about the sanctions. A phased, rather than one-time lifting of primary and secondary sanctions, tied to verifiable compliance with the agreements, and the Iranian public's so-called version of the demand is for a complete and immediate lifting, without any checks or anything like that. Now, the unfreezing of Iranian assets and the possibility to use them for reconstruction, but without any formula like repatriation from the U.S., it's their money. We just froze them because they attacked and so on, and in the Iranian version there is talk of compensation for damages. Of course, that's complete nonsense. We're not going to do anything like that. Now, about the American military presence. Partial withdrawal or redeployment of U.S. forces. That's not bad. A complete withdrawal, as Iran insists in its public plan. I want to remind you that Trump has long wanted to reduce the number of bases and the number of troops stationed at those bases. Now, the formal mechanism for long-term peace. A U.S.-Iran framework agreement with guarantees from third countries, with working groups on regional conflicts and a procedure.
Консультации вместо немедленных ударов.
Well, everything is fine when both sides really mean it. But both sides assume that the other side doesn't really mean it and is going to deceive. As of today, the exact text of these new 10 points is still classified. Well, at least we don't know. We don't know what's in there. Basically, we don't know anything. We're discussing leaks and retellings. From them, it's clear that this is more of a compromise, a middle ground document between Washington's tough plan, which is 15 points, and TGR's maximalist public 10-point plan. Since public statements and claims are also part of the negotiations and the game that diplomats play with each other, I wouldn't take everything that any side says literally. So, unquestionably and literally, but here's the feeling I get. The government that's negotiating, I mean the Iranian one, is not entirely free in making decisions. Militarily, to be specific, it's the current leadership of the core or the region. The leaders are afraid of responsibility and punishment if some other authority comes to rule Iran. That's why their main goal is to hold on to power to prevent, so to speak, another clique, another gang, or something else like that from coming to power. In a sense, we're not against this because the worst thing that could happen in Iran is 93 million people, different groups, different nationalities, different ideas about what's good and bad. This would lead to an even bigger nightmare than what happened in Iraq. How the power there collapsed, fell apart, disappeared. That's why the United States of America would like to see what we now call the Venezuelan scenario happen in Iran. That is, the government would not collapse, but would continue to function so that the country would not descend into chaos, so that the police would operate, the border guards would work, supplies would be provided, water would be available, and problems would be resolved, and so on. And, well, the U.S., of course, wants Iran to stop supporting terrorist organizations, to stop controlling the Strait of Hormuz, and, let's say, in the most extreme scenario, to hand over control of oil sales to the U.S., in other words, to become like Venezuela. The sides do not trust each other and therefore are afraid of tricks and deception, especially since the negotiators will also have to get through the much more aggressive stance of the military and religious leaders. If we make a prediction, of course, the U.S. will not invest money to rebuild Iran unless the U.S. will later participate in exploiting the facility. Then I think it will be like what we proposed with Ukraine: give us this piece or give us the contract, and we will invest our money and attract international funds. The U.S. also will not withdraw all its bases from the Middle East, and Israel will not tolerate terrorists near its border. So the future looks like this. If Trump and his team come up with it, they will come up with enough incentives for those who actually decide Iran's future. If the Iranians are convinced that Trump is a crazy lunatic and will therefore go to war again if negotiations fail, then we will have about 10 years of peace in the Middle East. And if during these 10 years there are civil changes within Iran itself, then maybe from being a rabid enemy of Israel and the U.S., Iran will become, as it was under the Shah, a friend, or maybe even a better one, the best friend of Israel and the United States of America. So for now, everything depends on what sweeteners, what carrots, what incentives are on offer. Kushner, Witkoff, and Trump will be able to offer the Iranian criminals something that will make it more beneficial for them to stop committing crimes than to continue with trade and development. Because you see, when they commit crimes, wage wars, and so on, they get ranks. And this way they can get yachts and villas on some Italian coast or somewhere else, wherever they like the most. Maybe even on Hormuz. I'm not sure if it's a good place to relax. But in any case, ladies and gentlemen, it's interesting that the first ship set sail, it seems, so to speak, always. Yes, one more thing. Always, 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 at the beginning of the truce, there will be someone who shoots, someone who doubts, someone who sends, and someone who acts. That is, some things will happen that it would seem broke the truce, but that's not necessarily the case. Maybe they broke it, or maybe it's just, so to speak, some reckless guys who just can't stop. And if all this really comes from the authorities who can actually make decisions in Iran, then we will now have a 2-week break. Well, Israel won't get a break because Israel will, of course, shift all its actions toward Hezbollah, and it will try quickly in these 2 weeks to get rid of everyone it can there. So, in any case, we'll be watching, following the news, and as they say, holding our breath. That's all for now. Goodbye.